we're going to talk about coding effectively with AI. I'm a big believer in having a clear goal for every talk. So my goal in here is for you to rethink your AI coding workflow. I want to just open your eyes. A lot of people sort of stumble into their workflow because, well, their coworker does this, or their boss gave them access here, or they've always done it this way. So what I want to do is just show 14 different key decisions. And what I would suggest that you do is have your phone or a notebook, whatever, and just write down some ideas for other things that you might want to try, given what we talk about. So let's begin with talking about the editor. The editor has historically been a really big decision for us as software developers. And you know, it wasn't that long ago that I was using Cursor. And I was very impressed with Cursor. Cursor was amazing, and one thing that made Cursor so popular was that it could basically read your mind. I could hit tab, and it would almost always just guess the next thing I needed to jump to and start suggesting the next change. So I could largely write code by hitting tab and then occasionally typing a few characters and giving it enough info to read my mind. Now, I would suspect you might not be using Cursor, but how many of you are using AI sort of in this way, like an autocomplete style of AI? Still a bunch of hands. All of you that are showing your hands, I would suggest you're doing it the hard way in 2026. The rest of this talk more or less presumes that this is not your idea of AI. Although this is AI, we are in 2026 in the agentic era. And by agentic era, I mean we're in the era where we tell AI to do something and then we let it go do that. And maybe we monitor it, or maybe we walk away from the keyboard. Maybe we've got our phone where we can get pings if we need to provide feedback. That, I think, is the state of the art right now. And if you haven't tried it, I think that's the most important takeaway here is try agentic workflows instead of merely using AI autocomplete. Now, if you embrace agentic workflows, then this becomes true. I don't think your editor should matter to you. I could be just about as effective now using Notepad, or all I really need out of VS Code these days is my diff tool. I guess I also use the Git integration. It's not like I have to. I can use Git on the command line. But increasingly, I don't even need the Git integration because I let AI handle my interactions with Git. I let it open the PR and name my commits and so on. So if you are using an agentic workflow, your editor really doesn't matter much. You spend your time in a terminal. Now me, I tend to use Claude Code these days, although I also use Cursor, I also use Codex, I also use GitHub Copilot. So I jump around between those four, just depending on context. I've tried other things as well. Now, if you are shopping around for an editor, some people feel strongly that they're still worthwhile. And one thing that you'll notice is there's lots of tools out there that are sort of hello world type of tools that are rapid prototyping tools like, say, V0 or Bolt or Lovable. Those I don't generally find useful. I don't really recommend them to developers generally, especially in this agentic era. But for people who are less technical, those can be, I think, particularly useful. And then it's interesting how I have these labeled as moving from 0 to 1, as in they're a good way to get started. But then you shift up to the top left quadrant. Those are good for moving on from there. Tools like Cursor, like Claude Code, like Devon, and so on. And again, Claude Code is my preference. Now, I tend to use the CLI. And when the CLI came out for Claude Code, they innovated here, and people thought, what the heck? Why in the world would I choose a CLI? Well, you fast forward, and most of my friends use Claude Code and love it and hang out on the CLI, and they don't really miss hanging out in an editor. So I have found this experience to be wonderful. And part of the reason I find this is, really, I'm just asking the machine to do things, so I don't need a fancy IDE. I am just watching the output, and I want that output full screen. I don't need other things mostly at the same time. But that is the first decision, your editor. And I would say these days it doesn't matter as much as it used to. So decision number 2 is the model. This is a pretty obvious one. Now I could go out to this site. There are hundreds and hundreds of models out there, and figuring one out can be tricky. There are sites like Design Arena that rank them in different ways. Like Design Arena is ranking them which are best at UI components, which are best at images. WebDev Leaderboard is another out here, SWE Bench, and then also you can go out to Hugging Face. all of these are places that rank models where you can get a sense of where they all play out. I would sort of summarize it like this. I'm a pretty big fan of Opus at the moment. It's not necessarily the best, but it is dang good. It is my daily driver these days. Although, honestly, any of the cutting-edge models all do really well. You can jump over into OpenAI and use the latest version of GPT-5 Codex, and it's wonderful too. But ultimately, you have to choose a model, and when you're choosing it, what's interesting is, well, maybe you don't choose at all. If you're using, say, GitHub Copilot, it has an auto mode where you can just say, I'm not even going to tell you what model you use, you figure it out. I'm not a fan of this. The reason I'm not a fan of it is, again, I'm a believer in go buy an expensive plan so that you don't have to think about tokens, and then just put it on the best model. Because ultimately, if I'm not thinking about tokens, why not just use the best model? Then I'm not wasting cycles jumping between models and thinking about how to carefully save tokens. And also, if I use a cheap model and it spits out the wrong thing and then I have to do it again, now I'm spending time, and time is definitely valuable as well. So it, to me, makes more sense to just pick my model, and I more or less just leave it on Opus these days. Now, you could run models locally, and there are reasons to do this for security, for privacy, or also if you just want to save money. I think this is an interesting space where we might find that at some point a lot of people are doing this because they're good enough. Arguably, they're already good enough. You can run things local that work quite well. I'm not aware of anything you can run local that quite competes with the cutting-edge models from providers, but they are quite good. You do have to have good hardware to make that happen. You also need to pick a plan. Again, my take is go buy an expensive one. You could think about this in the project triangle, good, fast, cheap, and the punchline is what? Pick two. So when you think about models, you could get a free model, or you could get a cheap model like Haiku, or a middle-of-the-road model like Sonnet, or a expensive but slower model like Opus, which, again, that's the trade there. Sometimes you're going to want something that is faster. So I'm not saying Opus is not best. It's just best generally in quality and best in tackling big tasks, that sort of thing. Now, you could also, in the OpenAI space, there are equivalents. If you're using Codex, then you could use these different models, and they are more or less equivalent to what I was talking about over on the Anthropic side. Also, though, open source models, as I mentioned, they are catching up really fast. They are now, on latest benchmarks, nipping at the heels of these closed source models. So that's an interesting space as well. So that's decision number 2, model. Now, decision number 3 is harness. And the word harness is interesting because I suspect how many of you in here feel like you could define a harness? Hardly anybody. Well, good, then this will be useful. Let's talk about harnesses. So a harness is basically this system prompt that you don't see. And it's also this set of built-in tools that come along with it. And when I think about a harness, I find it useful to think about a horse. So if I'm going to go ride a horse, I'm going to put a harness on that horse. And the harness, in the case of the AI conversation, it controls the model just like a harness controls a horse. And a good harness makes the model more powerful and it's easier to use. Now, the interesting point about this is this. Arguably, the best harness comes from the model's creator. This is why I don't use GitHub Copilot very often. Because Microsoft, although they created GitHub Copilot, they did not create the models that are running under GitHub Copilot. They do not have control over that. They can't tweak GitHub Copilot as well to work with specific models as the providers of those models. So think about this for a second. If you're using Claude Code, then effectively your harness is Claude's agent SDK. And the model is going to be Opus, Sonnet, Haiku, whatever. But the point is, the model and the harness creator are made by the same company, which is Anthropic. And that's part of what gives Claude Code such wonderful output is, yes, I could go over into, say, GitHub Copilot, and I could use one of the Anthropic models, but I'm using a harness created by Microsoft instead of a harness created by Anthropic. And I would rather use the harness created by the model creator for this exact reason. So another way you could think about this, just another example I should say, is in the OpenAI space, the harness is Codex and the model is GPT-5 or GPT-5 Codex. The creator of both the harness and the models is OpenAI. And again, this is why you'll see people choosing to use Codex instead of choosing to use some tool like Cursor or Copilot and so on that are separate companies running other people's models. And this shows what I'm getting at. So if I use Cursor, it supports many different models, but the thing is, those models aren't created by Cursor unless I use Cursor's new Composer 1 model, which does happen to be created by them. So they see this problem, and now both of them are created by the same company, which in this case would be AnySphere. So this decision of harness is pretty important. I'm going to breeze past there, but this is where I get into the weird analogy here. Like, think about if you were God, you could actually change the horse. The harness doesn't fit that well. Well, I could tweak the horse or I could tweak the harness. So now I can design a horse that fits really well with the harness instead of merely only being able to change the harness. And this is what Anthropic can do. This is what OpenAI can do. This is what Google can do. Because they own both the harness and the model, they have that kind of power. So there's various benchmarks out here for best AI coding agents that you can go find as well. So those are worth looking at. Again, I'll share the slides at the end so you can dig more into this. To give you a sense of it, I got like 70-something slides in 40-something minutes, so we got a boogie in here. Lots of different harnesses out there to consider. But again, my favorite is probably Claude Code, although I really do like Codex as well. And I also really enjoy Cursor in certain cases. And that sort of gets into this next decision, which is, where do you run AI? The list of places you can run AI is kind of silly. You could run it in chat. Like, we started out, lots of people were using ChatGPT and they would ask questions in there. And in fact, I would bet, how many of you are using ChatGPT, like copying and pasting code into there? Okay, actually, this is interesting. So this is a recent shift as people have been moving away from using ChatGPT and using other tools. Online chat is less popular now than it was. You can run it locally, which is my preference. You could run it in say a Docker container. You could put it on a separate box. A friend of mine went out and bought a MacBook Pro, just another one, and put it in his office just to run AI on another machine. I thought it was strange he chose a MacBook Pro. Usually people would use Mac Minis for this sort of thing. But the point is, you can get dedicated hardware and then just let it run. You can put it on a server. You could run it on a hosted remote. You could also fire it off via a GitHub issue, that sort of thing. This is a pattern I use all the time, being able to assign issues to AI so that it just runs out there in the cloud. You can also fire it off via Slack. You can integrate it with Slack. So lots of ways to do this. And what I would encourage you here is, if you're not using some of these, ask, maybe I'll put this on my list. Maybe I should do more areas than before. Okay, decision number 5. You have to choose thinking level. So you can basically tell AI how much time you want it to spend thinking. And the trade-off here is, the more time it spends thinking, the better your results, but also you're going to burn more tokens. It's going to take longer, so it can be tricky. I will point out that ultra-think is no longer a feature in Claude Code. It was, at this point, it's just kind of a funny thing. If you type the word, then you get this kind of rainbow text here, which is odd. You also have this choice about planning mode. At one point, I would have told you always use planning mode before every single prompt. I no longer feel that way. Planning mode is a trade-off like anything else. Now, the way planning mode works varies by tool, but in Claude Code, the way that it works is it's basically behind the scenes telling Claude Code really clearly, do not implement anything. Do not touch code. You need to just talk in response. And every once in a while, Claude Code will go rogue, and even though you're on plan mode, it'll just jump in and start doing things, because it's really just a prompt behind the scenes. And what's interesting is some other tools don't even have this idea of plan mode, because they are better at sensing when they should actually execute versus when you're merely asking a question. And this is interesting too, because I'll do things like, I'll get an error, and I will just take the error, copy it, and paste it into Claude. And I don't even give it any more context than that. I don't tell it, fix this error. I don't tell it where it occurred. I just say, just go. Because in my experience, it does a really good job of reading between the lines and figuring out what I actually wanted. So another way that you can trigger thinking levels, strangely enough, is just by using the word think. That will trigger extra thinking in some of these models. And you can also use words like evaluate or consider if you don't want that sort of behavior. Okay, the next decision, instructions. This one is key, and this is probably an area that I suspect a lot of us could improve on, because this is an area that we're actively learning. Now, I find it interesting. One of my favorite movies is the movie Memento. They don't make movies like this anymore. Memento was wonderful because it is a movie that runs backwards. You start out at the end, and then you slowly move your way to the beginning, and you're getting little pieces of the story. Now, Memento is interesting because he actually tattoos himself so that he can remember things, because he has no memory each time things reset. Oh, I have a very important piece of business. It's selfie time, everybody. Let's see. So check your hair. Make sure you look nice. I'm going to come down here. I don't know how well this... Oh, no, this actually works really well. All right, let's put our hands up like we're at an amusement park for no good reason. Ah! All right. Y'all look great. Thank you. Now, I got to run over to the other two theaters and get a picture. I'll be right back. So LLMs are largely stateless. Now, I should have an asterisk next to this because it's not actually true anymore. And in fact, arguably, it hasn't been true for a while. For instance, you probably use ChatGPT in your own personal life, and you regularly ask it things. ChatGPT remembers all of that. And that is a feature if you like that, or it's a bug if you feel like that's terrifying. But it's remembering everything that you've asked. Claude recently started doing this as well. And it is a weird place to be where you've got a little bit of sort of hidden away memories that are occurring. But largely you can think of them as stateless though. So then the question becomes, when I come in and give it a prompt, how do I tell it about my coding standards? How do I tell it about my project? Well, instructions are the way to do this. I will say though, a clean slate is a feature to some degree. We can't, as humans, we can't remember everything. We have to focus. We have to have things out of mind, and that's also true for AI. So with instructions, if there's no instructions file, then it more or less knows nothing about your project. So the solution to that is some instructions file. The name of that is going to vary depending on the tools you use and whether you've decided to use the standard, which is agents.md. That's a sort of growing standard at the moment. But you can think about it as global memory. I really want to emphasize the word global. If you have something in your instructions file that only applies to some things that you do, it probably doesn't belong in your instructions file at all. It may instead be best moved over to a skill, to a command, or perhaps to a subfile so that it's lazily read instead. So there's multiple ways to skin this cat. Now, it's critical, of course, to write this well because this is affecting every single prompt. If you lie to the AI, for instance, if I tell the AI, we write all of our tests in Cypress, and then all we have is Playwright tests. Well, is Playwright going to end up using Cypress for the next technique, or is it going to copy the Playwright tests over here? This happens surprisingly often because developers write docs once and then they forget to check them again. So the agents file can get out of sync over time. This is also a real risk if you go in and do things like, here's our folder structure. Your folder structure is changing all the time, and you know what? It greps really well. So I wouldn't waste your time describing a folder structure in your instructions. Remember, you don't want to send a folder structure on every single request. You're just wasting tokens, adding noise. And remember this too, that each previous prompt is going to be returned to maintain state. So the longer your conversation goes, the more bloated that context gets, and the more likely you are to get crappy results. So regularly, we want to clear that out. Now, what's interesting is how controversial instructions are. This study actually found that they were getting better results without an instruction file than with one, because the AI does a better job just finding stuff real time at that moment rather than having this generated instructions file. This is not to say that you shouldn't have any instructions, but I would say the core problem is right now people are bloating them, putting too much in. So some things that might be useful is the project's purpose or high-level architecture, global standards, and justifications like why does this need to be fast and so on. I would put your instructions within agents.md, but if you're using Claude, then you'll use Claude.md. I will say though, my Claude.md just says see agents.md. That's all I put in Claude.md because I want to have everything in agents because some people on my team may not be using Claude. Some of them are using Codex. And in fact, I use Codex as well. So I want agents.md to be gospel. That is the one source of truth. You can also use a symlink to pull this off as well. Copilot instructions is Copilot's traditional, but again, I would suggest using agents.md. This isn't supported by everybody yet. Anthropic is one of the big annoying holdouts, and they need to fix this, but there's been an open issue for a while on their repo. So you want to keep your instructions lean, like think around 100 to 150 instructions, and that avoids you bloating things. Also keep in mind that the beginning and the end of your instructions or any kind of prompt are going to take precedence. So the longer it gets, the more that it's going to pay attention to the beginning and the end, and it's going to ignore that middle. It's no different than a conversation with you and I. If I tell you a 30-minute story, you're going to remember the end of it and the beginning, and a lot of the stuff in the middle will just kind of muddy away. All right, decision number 7, the prompt. So when we talk about prompting, I have found good tickets lead to simple prompts. Controversially, my take is largely prompting should be dirt simple for you today. Prompting should look something like this. I say this because I'm on a project right now where I'm doing exactly this. I just say, here's the ticket, grill me. And grill me is a simple skill that asks me a bunch of questions using Claude's Ask User Question tool. So grill me is going to look at the ticket and then say, okay, what are the gaps in here? You're a little unclear in this area and this area. I'll answer those things and then I let it ride. So you'll see other people that will disagree with me that are saying, oh, a good prompt should be paragraphs of text and have all this in. I'm going, well, that should really be in a ticket, and your product owner should be declaring all of that sort of stuff. Or maybe it's a mock-up. I don't mind just pasting in a picture and going, implement this, grill me, tell me what questions you have. But I shouldn't be spending a whole lot of time typing long prompts. This is just my take. If your ticket is good enough, then this can be your reality. And what's interesting is I found this is true with me at some of my clients, and it's completely impractical at others that have really vague, bad tickets. Now, this is all I'm going to say about prompting because, frankly, a conversation about prompting deserves its own talk. But I will say prompting is obviously a big decision, and we could talk for a long while on that. Okay, decision number 8. You got to decide on permissions. What should I let the AI do? And it's interesting because permissions vary by tool. Like if you're using Codex, they have this idea of read-only, auto, or full access. Of course, the trade-off here is if you don't give AI much permission, then you are constantly going to be pinged and having to say, yes, okay, yes, okay, yes, okay. And this gets very old. Now, this idea of auto is quite handy. Codex has this. Claude Code, thankfully, just finally added it because this is one of my big annoyances. Auto basically is using AI to figure out, okay, we're going to decide that this is safe enough we can do it without asking you. Now, this is kind of funny because you're effectively trusting it to make your decisions about security, but depending on your risks, tolerance, then that can make sense for you. Now, there are actually lots of ways to handle Claude permissions. You can just accept edits. You could go into permissions and edit settings.json to change how it behaves. You could use /sandbox to enable a sandbox. You could go into YOLO mode, as they call it, dangerously accept permissions, whereas basically it can do anything and it might just go delete your whole database if you give it access. By the way, don't. If AI deletes your production database, that is your fault. Why did you give it production database access? It's like the junior developer. I did this. I deleted a table early in my career and my boss was livid. But I had production access on one of my first days and I knew nothing. I had no business having production access. We also didn't have source control. I deleted a file and I couldn't figure it out. We should have had source control. Okay, I'll stop my sandboxing, but obviously it's left a scar for me. So anyway, I breezed past this, but one of the cool ones is number 6. You can use a Docker sandbox. This works with any AI. Effectively, you spin up a lightweight sandbox, and now that AI can only access files within that sandbox. So now you are safe. The only thing that it could do that would be dangerous would be it could screw up your Git history. But it can't go reach outside and read other files. This was a conversation we had last night at the speaker dinner. What's terrifying is how AI is automatically looking outside of your folder. You may not realize that. Well, 2 days ago, I was implementing a front end. I had the back end project in some other folder on my machine. It found the back-end project, looked at the DTOs and said, that DTO is going to need updated to give you the data you need for your front end. And I'm going, I didn't even tell you about that back end. How did you figure out that that back end was for this front end when it's in a different folder on my machine? It is looking around. So that was both cool and scary. I don't know, we're in a weird spot. So there's lots of good reasons to run AI in a sandbox just for safety purposes. Decision number 9 is about automated testing. This is more important than ever. I think this is also, the bar has never been lower for writing tests at this point. Now, you have a lot of decisions here. Should you write the test first or should you write the test last, just like in the human days? If it's first, should I write it myself or should I generate it? Should I run it after each change or should I manually just do so? Should I use MCP for getting this done? What about code coverage? Should I tell it to go find functions that aren't covered? Lots of decisions here, and deciding how to do this well is tricky. So I'll just give you my take just in short here. I tell AI to write tests as it creates features. And I create and iterate on a skill. So I want to create a skill that does automated tests, and then over time, as I see it making mistakes, I improve that skill. So now I have something to work with. If you're not familiar with skills, skills are a way to teach your AI to do subtasks, to be a specialist in, say, writing automated tests, or doing security reviews, or accessibility reviews, and so on. I would also encourage you, write some example tests. The thing that AI does so well is copy things. The very first test you write is super important. And this is interesting too. Like, go back before AI. When I created my first test, that meant that every other human was going to go look at those first tests and then copy the pattern. So nothing has actually changed here. Like, I very much personify AI, and I recognize that most of the stuff I'm talking about here is really just old school quality patterns that just happen to have a different user at this point. I would also say absolutely enforce code coverage, because getting good code coverage is fairly cheap, and this is a good way to force the AI to write more tests. So when it sees that code coverage falls below 90%, it goes, oh, your build actually has failed for me. Let me go write some more tests. I can see some areas I can improve it. I found it does quite a nice job filling that in. I tell it that it must write and run the test before it declares itself done. And this is where I'm going to breeze through this next little section, because basically my talk this afternoon gets into this next point. This is the most important thing. When people tell you AI writes slop, it is a user error. Yes, AI writes slop. But if you are letting it write slop, that is because you do not have a feedback loop for the AI. No different than a junior developer. I was a junior developer and I wrote slop. I did not know what I was doing and I kind of stumbled through, and then over time I got better. But when I got on teams where they wrote good tests, where they had solid linting, where they had automated checks for quality, then it would regularly yell at me and I'd go, oh, okay, line 14 is wrong. What does that mean? I would learn on the fly and then I wouldn't do that again. So if you find yourself saying something in a code review, it should probably be part of your feedback loop. The point here is the agent needs a way to check its work. The agent is lazy as hell, and the agent wants to say, hey, I'm done. But if you make it run your tests and run your linting and run your build and check your types, if you write custom lint rules that enforce all your stuff, then it will have to make all that pass before it declares itself done. So feedback loops, I think of them very much like guardrails on the road. And these are all sorts of different things that could be part of your feedback loop. Again, I'm going to breeze through this because we're going to talk more about it this afternoon at 2. So for more on feedback loops, oh, I should say 2. I thought my talk was at 1, but I'm doing an AI panel at 1, though, if you want to come hear some pontification there. There'll be a group of us there. Okay, so decision number 11, workflow. This one is huge. This could be a talk in and of itself because there are so many ways to set up workflows with AI. Do you want to chat? Do you want to have a single agent? Do you want to use sub-agents? Do you want to use multiple different agents? Do you want to get this all done away from the keyboard? You'll see people say AFK, that means away from keyboard. You could also choose to use various opinionated spec-oriented tools like SpecKit or Superpowers. I find these to be really heavy and unnecessary, but some people like them. I would encourage you to go try SpecKit. It's interesting. Again, I just don't find it necessary. You also might want to visualize or orchestrate multiple tasks, I should say. And then you also have this decision of how does AI change things? Does pair programming make more sense now or no sense at all? Because I'm kind of pairing with the AI. Do I need yet another person here? What would that look like? The people that are doing this are effectively, you've got one person that's up there typing prompts and another person that's helping direct and discuss those prompts. I personally am not pair programming much. I'm doing it when I'm teaching people AI tools these days, but that's primarily it, so that we can see how each other are effectively interacting with the tools. Now, to give you a sense of how wild you could go with a workflow, you've probably heard of OpenClaw, which is the personal open source AI that's been renamed multiple times. It was called Claudebot originally. So the creator, though, he pushes about 144 commits a day. He has 5 to 10 agents that run in parallel, and he doesn't read any of his code. So don't you want to go give it your bank information? I am not using OpenClaw. I think it's terrifying. Like, this combination in here just makes no sense to me. I also find it interesting that you're seeing tools like, or you're seeing Anthropic increasingly create their own competitors to OpenClaw as they add more features in. And that's part of why it was very important to them that OpenClaw be called that rather than Claudebot, because it would be very confusing as they created their own. So running multiple agents is interesting. There are lots of ways to do it, again. And I'm not going to walk through all of these, but I will say the one that I normally do is very simple. It's the first one. I just clone the repository twice. If I've got a repo and it's called blurg, I have a folder called blurg1 and a folder called blurg2. And then I jump between the two. My take is I don't want a bunch of concurrent agents. I actually think that is a bunch of navel gazing. I think people want to say that they're running 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 agents concurrently so that they sound like they're a badass. But in actuality, I'm not convinced it's that useful. What's useful is making sure that the AI is doing the right thing. So I want to monitor it. That said, there are some really cool tools. I want to draw your attention to one that I found just really compelling as a potential future. Vibe Kanban is an open source project that shows all of you can trigger agents on a Kanban board. So you create a ticket on the board, it runs your agent, kicks it off. So notice I put in what I want it to do, and then I just say start, and that's going to trigger the agent just to get started. And then I've got this visualization on the board. So I could have a bunch of concurrent agents. I can see where they are visualized over time. And then as it runs, I've got a built-in diff in here. Like, this is a cool workflow, I will say, but ultimately I found it more novel than truly necessary for me. Because again, I'm typically working 1 agent at a time or 2. And this is because I have a very controversial idea, which is I think I should read the code. If I think I should read the code, then if I go generate code 6 times as fast or 10 times as fast, I'm not actually solving a problem. I'm just creating a pile of reading that's going to stack up for hours and hours. Now, if you're not going to read the code, then fine. Go spin up as many agents concurrently as you want. I just don't think we're there yet. Now, there's lots of people talking about this problem, and Theo has a wonderful video about this issue. But again, my take is I'm skeptical that multiple agents are worth it. When I want to do human inspection, I still think that's important. So the way that I work is when I'm waiting, I relax, I read, I walk. And when I say read, usually what I'm doing is I'm reading what the AI is doing. I'm thinking about the next step. I'm looking at the code that it generates while it's generating. I might also spin up a second agent if I have some other just simple tasks that I could get going at the same time. But most importantly is number 4. I think you should be reviewing code as it's spit out. This is also why I like using Claude Code over Codex, because Claude Code is eager to start writing code, whereas Codex is more hesitant. It will wait longer and plan longer. Now, you'll get better results out of Codex, but it doesn't mean you're waiting longer. So that's the trade there. I find my results are good enough with Anthropic's, with Opus, that I'm just pretty happy as is. So when you've got these options, I tend to favor 4. Okay, so there are lots of red flags with running multiple agents. Ask yourself, hey, maybe I should break this task down. Am I actually skipping code reviews? It's fine to do it if it's a simple task, you're just experimenting and those sorts of things. You've probably heard this conversation around running Ralph Wiggum loops, which is a reference to The Simpsons. Ralph Wiggum loops is the idea of running your AI away from the keyboard just for hours and hours while you sleep, and then seeing whether it comes to a solution. So you give it a backlog of tasks, and it will just keep trying to work on these hard tasks until it gets there. I'm not a fan of this idea. I don't think it makes much sense, at least for the way I want to work. I also will say, we're in a bizarre world where if you're billing by the hour, the definition of work is getting really gray. If I'm on my phone, like authorizing it to move to the next step, am I working? If I'm out shopping around, like I can control the AI, but it's a weird place to be. Lots of downsides with Ralph, so personally I'm not a fan, but there are some people that find it useful. Another decision to make is tools. And when we talk about tools, you're probably thinking MCP, but also keep in mind that CLIs have been around forever. And one thing that AI does really well is it writes code, not surprisingly. So if you've got a CLI, it can write a little bit of code to call that CLI. And in fact, it works really well, and it, in my experience, often works better than the equivalent MCP server. Thank you. So I tend to often prefer using a CLI if it's available. The problem with MCP is bloat. It dumps the entire tool catalog into the conversation. And that leads to things like this, where you'll actually get warnings in VS Code saying, hey, you've got a bunch of tools enabled. Watch out. You may want to turn some of them off because you're going to experience degraded behaviors. It bloats context. It leads to routing problems, as in, if I've got 128 different MCP tools, how do I know which one it's going to invoke? Some of those might have overlap, and I'm leaving it to the AI to decide which one to do, so that's tricky. Also, they may just be built in. Now, there are some solutions to this. Claude's tool search recently came out, which will largely avoid the token bloat issue. But in short, I would recommend using CLIs when you can. That's generally my preference, like Google's CLI agent. Notice what it says here. The tool definitions never enter the context window if you use the CLI. It is discovering at runtime, and it's discovering it dynamically. So the CLI is pretty nice that way. Also keep in mind you may not need MCP. You could tell the LLM to generate code to call APIs. You could tell it to use a CLI. You can tell it to use the browser. So there's lots of other ways to go get things done. MCP is just one way, and I think MCP to me was probably overhyped, and lots of people created MCP servers, but there are far fewer people consuming them all than creating them all at this point. Okay, decision 13. Type or talk? This one's interesting because just probably a month and a half ago, my opinion changed on this. I thought that everybody was going to be talking to their machines, and maybe this will happen. You can do it in lots of different ways. There are lots of free tools out here like Mac Dictation or Windows Voice Typing, or a tool that I use, which is Spokenly. Or you could do a one-time purchase, or there's lots of freemium trial types out here that you pay more for. The point is, what if you just talked all your prompts since you're not typing much code anyway? Well, the thing is, when you're doing this, I would suggest that you do local dictation. And local dictation is nice because it's free, it's accurate, it'll work on a plane, works anywhere, assuming that the noise from the plane doesn't add too much problems for you. So I've done this with Spokenly, and then for my dictation, I use the parakeet model. So effectively, I'm doing this for free. And I was pretty happy with this setup, but what I ultimately found was things come up like this, like, oh, I want to replace some words. And when I say C#, I don't want you to say the word sharp, I want you to say the pound sign. And it's one thing after the other there, some paper cuts there. Some tools are better at this than others, and this is why you might want to pay, because you could get human-like intelligence for fixing your mistakes. It'll do code formatting, they'll recognize variables, they'll know more context around where you are in the IDE, and that'll help them do better. And they'll know more dev jargon out of the box. So there are good reasons to pay for some of these if you want, but ultimately I've decided I don't talk anymore. I'm not really using Spokenly. The reason that I don't is a couple of things. Remember how I showed you earlier my prompt? Go implement pound 42, ticket 42, grill me. Like, I'm not saying much. I'm not doing long, drawn out. When I have an error, I just paste the error in. When I want to tell it about something specific, I put the @ sign and then I reference the file. I want to be very specific about that file. And you get autocomplete support in the CLI when you reference files. If I'm speaking, I can't easily do that. So for me, I don't speak, but you might find this. The other big problem with speaking, of course, is if you're in a noisy environment, if you're in an office and other people hear you speaking, it gets annoying pretty fast. That's why these are called whisper flow and things, because you're supposed to just whisper the task. But you don't want to spend your day whispering. Here's the funny thing. Whispering is harder on your voice than regular speaking. I don't know why, but today you learned. So, yeah. But there's my reasons. Okay, we're down just a few minutes, but good news, this is the last one. Code reviews. Oh, lovely code reviews. One of my favorite books is The Phoenix Project, and then its precursor, which was called The Goal. If you haven't read either, I loved both, but here's the big point that comes out of it is, too many of us are spending time trying to optimize things that are not the bottleneck. And if you're optimizing something that's not the bottleneck, you're not saving any time at all. So for instance, I worked on a team where we had 6 developers, and I was the manager of the development team, and we were shipping code like crazy, and then we had one QA, and QA was drowning in tickets, and our board showed this. I go, oh my gosh, look at this. We got 14 tickets in the QA column, and the devs have one thing each they're working on, and this is not getting better. So if I hired more developers, is that gonna make us faster? No, because I'm not working the bottleneck. The bottleneck is QA. We needed to hire more QA, or developers needed to pivot over and join with QA. Well, now we're in a world, thank you. Now we're in a world where AI is generating code so fast that code reviews have become, in my experience, the bottleneck. And one thing that I will say is very uncontroversial to me is you should be using AI to do your code reviews. It should automatically review every single pull request with you doing nothing. Who is doing this today? Not enough. That's like 20%. I want to emphasize this. If you take one thing from my talk today, it's this. When you get back in the office, go pick any AI. I don't care which. We happen to use GitHub Copilot just because it's cheap and it's easy. I don't actually think it's that great at it, but it does find a lot of stuff. The reason I say I don't love using Copilot for this is I find it annoying that I can't configure it more. It's often kind of nitpicky and just points out minor things. And it also tends to repeat itself. So there are better tools out there. You could look at CodeRabbit, Codo, lots of them. I'm going to talk about them more this afternoon at 2. The real elephant in the room is this. And I don't know. I think directionally we're headed toward a world where behavior may be all that matters. And that's a really weird thing to say as a developer. But if your competitor is able to ship by just looking at behavior, they can ship way faster than you if you're looking at code. I mean, way faster. And that may be a competitive advantage, choosing not to look at your code and just focus on behavior, have really good tests, have really good guardrails. And again, that's why I want to talk about this afternoon. If you're going to do this, you have to have amazing guardrails. So we have to talk about that. My suggestion is configure your AI to automatically review your PRs. Do adversarial reviews, as in have one AI review another AI. So what I do is I have Claude Code go look at Copilot's comments and then evaluate Copilot's comments and decide whether they're worth fixing. Sometimes Copilot is crazy and says, oh, this API is actually doesn't work, this won't even compile, and Claude goes, no, it compiles, you're using an older version of the API, your knowledge is outdated, which I find interesting. And in my experience, Claude is typically right. So I don't even actually change the PR anymore. I tell Claude to change the PR on my behalf. I look at what Claude wants to do, I have it commit and the whole thing, I have a skill to get this done. It's really cool. And then I have the human reviewer come in after all this is done as a final pass. Okay, we timed this perfectly. Time for a wrap up. First, I've already alluded to it. The big problem is that AI generates slop. Lots of people feel this way. I want to talk about the solution today at 2, so we'll be talking about automating quality with AI at 2. If you want a summary of everything that I talked about, let me breeze through this. I don't think editor matters much anymore. I would suggest using Opus as your daily driver. It's my favorite. I would suggest using a harness and a model that are made by the same company. So for instance, if you want to use OpenAI models, then use Codex because they do that. I would suggest running local and running also on your PRs. And I would suggest only using plan mode if it's complex because it does slow things down. For instructions files, start empty. If you generated your instructions file, it is probably bloated. It probably contains a bunch of stuff. Go ask AI to audit your instructions file. Tell it, hey, look at this. What in here could I remove? What can I thin out? What can I organize? For your prompt, it should be small. Ideally, you could just point it at a ticket if your tickets are that good. So that's a bar you can aspirationally head toward. For permissions, I suggest using auto mode. I'm pretty happy with that, or consider a sandbox. Have AI write all your tests. Again, like I told you, we generated over a 5-week period, we had almost 5,000 automated tests written in Veet Test. It was amazing, like so much test coverage. And those were really helpful because AI was getting feedback on its work. For your feedback loop, be sure that you have some kind of a check script. I'm going to show how that works today at 2. For workflow, I suggest just doing 1 to 2 agents. Don't do a whole bunch of them. For tools, prefer CLI over MCP. I suggest that you type rather than talk. And for code reviews, absolutely use AI for your code reviews. Now, if you like this, if you found this useful, this is a little taste of, I usually do multi-day workshops at companies. I get up, we all code together, and we learn how to move faster with AI. If that's of interest, take a picture of this. This will get you the slides, and then obviously my contact info's here. I'm an independent. This is what I do, is I travel around and help teams move faster with AI. So please reach out to me. Did you learn something new? This useful? Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.